When you're building a culture of belonging, every word counts. That's why Textio brings the world's most advanced language insights into your hiring and employer brand content. Our industry-leading approach to artificial intelligence and machine learning provides the tools needed to find more diverse candidates. In short, Textio builds more equitable workspaces, guiding businesses and writing more inclusive job posts. And we're building on that success by bringing even more products to the market for all people who share our belief that language matters. Words have power, and at Textio, we harness that power to increase the access and availability of value-driven work for everyone.
Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Access Point. And this is brought to you by Living Corporate. Let me tell you a little bit about Living Corporate. It is a digital media network consultancy focused on workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion. Living Corporate centers and amplifies Black and Brown voices in the workplace through digital media production and B2B consulting. The network offers a variety of programming, including the Access Point. The Access Point is a weekly webinar focused on preparing Black and Brown aspiring and experienced professionals for the workplace by having the real nuanced talks they don't know they need. During each episode, we examine real challenges people face at work and offer expert advice on dealing with your organization, your boss, your coworkers, and your career. Here's a disclaimer for this evening. The thoughts and views expressed in tonight's discussion do not reflect the views of any organization the host or guests may be affiliated with. Welcome again, and let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Wendy M. Edmonds. I am the author of Intoxicating Followership and also co-author with Dr. Lonnie Morris on When Leadership Fails. I am a professor at an HBCU and also a management consultant. And so I want to turn this over now to my wonderful, wonderful co-host and remind you all that your job is your treasure. There's different types of people. And what I do is I help you figure out which ones are the good ones and which ones are not. How about that? Dr. Lonnie Morris.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Wendy. I appreciate it. Happy Thursday, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Lonnie Morris, a management consultant and professor. I spend my time helping really, really talented executives figure out why things go terrible at work. And I think my role is to help you hate your job less and to help people at work stop acting so crazy. I'm super excited because I am fanning out right now because we have an extraordinary guest this week, and she is our Living Corporate sister, one of the co-hosts of The Break Room. We have Dr. Nikki with us. Dr. Nikki Coleman is a coach, a consultant, a trainer in the areas of racial stress and racial equity. She works with executives and employee resource groups and affinity groups to facilitate greater racial equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we are honored to have you here. And I was fanning out in our pre-meeting with our producer today, Dr. Nikki. Why don't you come in and say hello to the people?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for that, for the warm welcome. And I will again say I'm grateful for the invitation. I love this Living Corporate collabo, and I'm excited to be here, but I'm really excited to get into this particular conversation because it is one I have a great deal of personal experience with. And then I have a private practice and I work with predominantly Black women, high achieving Black women. And the conversation we're going to have tonight is resonant with a lot of the stories that I hear and work that I have to do with them on a regular basis. So I'm just ready to see where the conversation goes.
Well, there we go. Well, let's jump right in. Tonight's discussion is we titled it Tools for When They Go Low. But we know that's code, right? We're really talking about how to deal with conflict without falling into these stereotypical tropes and how to safely advocate for yourself in naming harm in the workplace and the tools that we need to safely navigate that. Right? So that's the nice way of saying it. And I think that the whole idea of managing conflict and conflict management is great for training purposes. And we said you've got to take this training. You got to do this before you get your raise. You got to fill out this questionnaire. You got to go to this workshop. I love that. But I'd like for us to start, Dr. Nikki, when we're talking about conflict at work, what are we really talking about? What is this?
The question is always multi-layered when we're talking about Black and brown folks, because in the world of work, we always have to navigate the both and of personal relationships and the perception of us as racialized beings, right? And so sometimes the conflict comes to your door simply because you are minding your good Black and brown business and doing your job. And sometimes and sometimes it's because you really do have an authoritative position on something, or you're an expert in something, and that in and of itself can be threatening, can be provocative, and that can bring discord because it really is a reflection of the other person's discomfort, right? The conflict in any interaction or engagement means that there's a resource gap, a skills gap. There's a difference in opinion, and we can't figure out how to navigate that in a way that brings consensus, or that is community based, or that integrates both ideas, right? And so when we experience that at work, I think there's always the personal as well as the professional.
I love that. Dr. Wendy.
Yes. And Dr. Nikki, you are absolutely right. I think about workplace oppression. So sometimes when you're at work and you are not recognized, there's a sense of being ignored, and you check yourself to say, is it me or is it them? And having in an environment where you're not supported, where no one is giving you eye contact or the proper contact when it's due, this repeated sense of exclusion leaves you feeling a sense of devalue.
So that's interesting. And I think when we're talking about devalue, I think we can't go through this conversation without bringing this up. This week, we saw Edward Snowden was granted Russian citizenship, right? But when I look at Edward Snowden, if you don't remember who that is, this is the guy who leaked workplace documents working for the NSA, I think NSA, showing how data was passed through different security levels and how he felt his employer, which was the United States government, was manipulating things. He had been trying to tell people about it. He criticized his bosses for how they were executing the work. He shared information about budget, about people at the top, about allies, about national foes. So I think if I can't stand the people at my job and they don't listen to me as a person, Edward Snowden fits that, right? So if we look at all these things about being dismissed and this oppression, if we are under the umbrella of that, under the foothold of that, how do we come out of that, right? Because in this example, this guy leaked everything to the entire world, then left the country. We don't all have that option right now.
I'm just saying that's extreme, right?
He said, I'm going to tell everybody and they mama.
And they mama.
And I'm going to run. And then I'm going to run.
And I'm out, right? He did the mic drop, and I'm out. So if we can't do Snowden and leave the country, what do we do first? Dr. Nikki.
I love this question. So let me just let me add this point. One of the things that I talk a lot about with my clients is how oftentimes Black and brown folks, when we are at the top of our game in particular structures, we don't get challenged in a way that facilitates our professional growth. The challenge oftentimes serves to keep us in keep us sort of oppressed, right? Like,
yeah.
The challenge is a personal one. It's about interpersonal dynamics and not being a team player. And sometimes you're just so aggressive. It's all of these coded things rather than here's your skill set, here's your expertise. How do we elevate that? Can you apply that? Let me give you this project to see if you can work, right? And so that, I think that is just a context that we have to name as part of this conversation
Absolutely.
as well. And so, with that in mind, I always tell people do a self inventory. Like self awareness will always serve you. So, if you are the common denominator in the conflict, doesn't mean necessarily that you are at fault, but it does require you to think about what is your accountability? What are you contributing to the situation? So, I'm going to always advocate to start with self first, especially if you're noticing a pattern where whoever the source of conflict comes from, they don't seem to have that issue with anybody else, right? And so, what I think that does is empower you to get clarity about what the situation actually is and what parts of your behavior or communication or approach are you willing to um, compromise and or edit and or change, right? And then the second piece that I always advocate for is the ability to think about things as objectively as possible, right? And my grandmother, my grandmother used to have this placard up on her kitchen wall, and it said, "Never argue with a fool because passersby can't tell who is who."
Come on
And
now.
that
That's right, Nana.
Say that one more time.
never argue with a fool because passersby can never tell who is who. And that wisdom has served me so well. And so when I decide that the conflict has reached a place that is beyond annoyance, right? That it's reached a place where it's actually impeding my capacity, it's impeding my sense of comfort or well-being at work. It may actually even be impeding my professional development at work. Then I get really crystal about what are the observable objective facts, right? Let's not make it a he said, she said. Let's talk about what anybody sitting around the table would observe, because that makes it that much more difficult for people to dismiss you or to refute your particular position.
I like
Are
that.
you offering the recommendation of a conversation? You like that? You like the way I did that?
And then we could, we are on the Living Corporate Network, so we could talk about where the conversation happens, with whom the conversation happens, right? Because there's some that happen in the hallway, there's some that happen in the bathroom, there's some that happen
Yeah.
in the cubicle, right? But a conversation with the person is that, like, you can't ever really go wrong with that. And if we think about how things can get escalated in the workplace to an HR issue, right? Like that's going to always be their first go-to tactic too. Well, have you tried to talk to them about it, right? So I'm saying have a conversation, but be strategic about the conversation you are having.
And I love this, and I want to bring you into this, Dr. Wendy, because there's a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, and that proposed that people have a hard time dealing with conflict. And so, to your point, Dr. Wendy, Dr. Nikki, having conversations about these things because they take ownership of the arguments that they're making and the positions that they're taking. And so when people challenge those, it feels like a threat to the personal ego. So you can't do what you just asked us to do, is look at the observable, objective facts, because you feel like your ego is being attacked. So are we comfortable with this, Dr. Wendy?
It really brings up the point about illusions. So what someone may see about you isn't who you are. And so it goes back to what Dr. Nikki says about doing that self-examination. When you open up the discussion, you have to be ready to have the discussion. You have to know thyself. What are those things about you that's raising the issues and the responses that you're getting? And so it isn't so much that it is a blame at all or self-condemnation, because it can be an education depending on how the conversation goes in so many respects. So
That
I
was a
would
word right
say
there. You spitting bars right now, Dr. Wendy. I heard all that.
it really can.
I would also add, on the other side of the psychology, world, in the practice of clinical psychology, that's very true. We don't know how to handle conflict well. We don't get a lot of really um, healthy examples and modeling of how to do that, right? So we talk about the passive aggressive continuum, and people tend to default to one end or the other, and we try to talk about being in the middle where there's assertiveness, right? Where you're stating your position, but also, like Dr. Wendy just said, you're open to the discussion, right? Let's get clarity. Let's figure out where we both are coming at this. But that is a skill. And in most workforce development, I don't know that the skills are taught in that way. I know,
Nope,
um,
they're not.
oh my God, if I hear somebody say impact versus intent one more time, I'm gonna throw a shoe across the room, right? Like, oh my God. And it really sort of stays there. Or like, let's have a crucial conversation. And then it doesn't really go anywhere. And the reality is, conflicts are never resolved in one conversation. It's never a one and
Never,
done.
never.
And that is the skills component, right? That you're willing to continue to stay invested or willing to be accountable in the conversation. And most people just they don't want that smoke. They don't want to.
And knowing when to stop the conversation, because you've had enough that's palatable, and you have to really digest it. And that's a skill too, knowing when to stop.
So I'm glad we're talking about skills as it relates to this, because I always think of the lens of what does this mean for bosses. So just earlier this month, LinkedIn had a report where they surveyed managers about dealing with conflict, and they said that 40% of the managers they surveyed reported, the managers surveyed reported they spend 40% of their time dealing with interpersonal conflict between employees that stem from miscommunication and misunderstanding. 40% is a big chunk of time at work. So I'm curious here about why it's so prevalent. But what also makes me think about is these are some organizational challenges and probably some leadership deficiencies here. If you're spending almost half your time dealing with people who are out of sorts with each other, that is bigger than just the employee. What's happening here, Dr. Wendy?
I think that also speaks to what people are coming to work with. So leadership, the training in recognizing conflict, dealing with conflict should not be all consuming. But what are people coming to work with? What are they dealing with that is unresolved that comes to the workplace? And then on top of that, especially Black and brown people, if in fact there isn't a level of satisfaction because when you show up and you are yourself, it isn't received, that just really piles on. So how does management, if they're not trained, deal with it? It turns into what we call microaggressions, right? This
Come
is
on now.
it's goes back to civility in the workplace. Oh, that's expected. um they're not a team player. Any is done looks like a conflict, right? So we want to be authentic. We want to bring our true self to work. But when we show up, even if we leave our mess at the door, if we show up and it isn't recognized in our professional setting, it's going to take up 40 to 50% of the time, because that's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like trouble.
Looks like trouble. Dr. Nikki.
Yes, and I want to pick up where Dr. Wendy just left off and say, um, I call it the catch-22 racism, right? So if I try to keep to myself because I don't feel like I can bring my full self to work without repercussions, then there is paranoia, gossip, questioning, confusing around that, right? Or if I do try to bring myself to work, then I do open myself up to experience more microaggressions. At a bare minimum, opening yourself up to even be maybe misunderstood. And I think there's another layer here that's important for us to talk about, and that is communication styles, right? There's enough research
Yeah.
out there that supports that
Woo.
Black and Brown folks are much more conversant in direct communication
Mhm,
than indirect.
mhm.
I mean, look, you just said you're gonna throw a shoe at somebody. If that's not direct.
Oh my gosh, yes, right? And realizing like, okay, yes, I have enough professional development and civility and emotional regulation that I don't really mean I'm going to throw a shoe, right? But there's this heightened sensitivity that we know Blackness, and for sure evokes a sense of threat. So when we're trying to resolve conflict, even our communication styles can oftentimes contribute to it. I was faculty at the University of Houston for a number of years, the majority of my career, and probably for the last 4 years or so, I had another Black male colleague, and when we would have um, programmatic faculty meetings, he and I would disagree about things, or we would have a discourse, and you could feel the air being sucked out of the room. It was just
Oh.
regular conversation between he and I. Like, I have a
Mm-hmm.
position,
Mm-hmm.
you have a position. I'm going to explain why I feel this way, or what I'm thinking, and what I think the consequences are, and you do that. But the white folks around the table would like slowly sort of shrink away. And then it got to a point where he was like, check, he was like, "We good, right?" And I was like, "No, we good."
I'm still your friend,
I mean,
I'm still
cause,
your
right?
cause I
friend.
could
I'm
tell
like,
you about yourself and still be friends with self.
still be your friend, because I
Yeah.
literally is like, "Oh no, we good. I'm gonna have to go teach my class." Like, it's not a thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there, I think that's another layer that happens. And we still have this imbalance in leadership positions and how they are distributed in a lot of workplaces, and that folks that are in management, supervisory positions might not necessarily look like the majority of people that they are managing. And so then, you know, there's the avoidance of engaging the conflict because there's a skills deficit for them as well.
Oh yeah, and I,
Okay.
and I, I
Mhm.
hear I hear clients talk about that all the time, about being the powerful, dominant, competent Black woman, and pacing what you say because you don't want, as you just mentioned, Dr. Nikki, for the air to get sucked out of the room when you express your concern about an issue or your dismay about something that happened, because it is not just received as a valued member of our community contributing to the conversation and to our organizational or departmental growth. It's received as, uh-oh, she's angry. Uh-oh, something's about to happen.
And
Yep.
Dr. Lonnie and Dr. Nikki, think about this, where you can come as the competent Black woman, the articulate Black woman, uh, and be made to give the appearance that you are aggressive because you have no problems with being able to speak and speak well and speak loud and make your point. So I had an experience one time where I made a comment and corrected a colleague, a white colleague. And of course, everyone is at the executive conference table, around the table. And so the approach that this person took to the conversation, to, I guess it was to make me feel as though I was dominant, and maybe my conversation, because I was sure and confident, was intimidating. Um, she began to lean on the table and be very submissive, and, well, no, kind of. And I looked at that, and I looked around the table, and all the eyes were on me, as though I had done something wrong because I corrected what she said. And so that really was very interesting, the way, because I was confident, because the information that I delivered was correct, and because I was confident in that, it gave the appearance, her response to me gave the appearance that I was overly aggressive and maybe even threatening.
Dr. Woody, you know that is a primary tool and tactic that white women learn in elementary school. She has been
That's all
perfecting
I'm
that.
saying. That's
She's
all
been
I'm
perfecting
saying.
that since third grade, honey.
but
laid across the table just as nice, and I just looked like, what? And when I looked up,
happening.
I could not. I was like, oh my goodness,
Yes,
it's real.
And so
it
here's
is
what's
real.
important about that to me, right? I think there's part of what you're saying to us, Dr. Wendy, is stand in your greatness and show up with that, as Dr. Nikki told us, to be authentic and be okay with it. And I get it because of how they see us and how they interpret how we respond. But I'll tell you, when I sit in the room, and it might be in a Zoom room so much lately, and when there are issues, most times I'm at tables where I am an expert, at least a subject matter expert on this, right? So got 2 books. I've probably presented at multiple international conferences on 5 different continents, got multiple papers published about this, do this work with organizations, with individuals all the time. So when Lonnie speaks, you should listen. And that's sort of what we want to carry, is that there's no reason for you to dim your light in this space. You understand how to navigate, and I hope that we're getting to sort of the safety issue around it, but we should be okay. It is okay for us to show up in all of our full selves, Dr. Nikki, with all the authenticity, with all the competence that we bring. And you got to be okay with it. Eat it.
You got to be okay with it, and that. Thank you so much for that, because that is the point I was trying to make earlier. Is that when yes, you show up, Lonnie, as the expert subject matter, and somebody can ask a critical question, well, then we should respect your response. But we also, in a real functional workplace where we are dedicated to excellence, or we are trying to make sure that we're working at our utmost highest level, then let me challenge you. Let me challenge
Yeah.
you on an expert level, right?
Yeah.
Let's then, how do we take that knowledge and then leverage it for this space? But so often what happens is, sometimes you are the smartest person in the room.
Don't tell nobody.
And right? And there's only so much fun that can be had in that way, right? I think that there's people that are invested in being lifelong learners, that are scholars, that are interested in asking critical questions and having data-based conversations. That's fun. That's exciting. We could be passionate about it, right? But it doesn't mean that it necessarily requires me to be personally invested. And I think what happens is that passion, that confidence that you all are both talking about, like, you're not gonna tell me that the ground I'm standing on is not as solid as I know it to be. You can't convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
That sort of approach is where I think the conflict arises, because I don't know that they know what to do with that. Where do we go with that?
Wow. That brings me to this idea of social capital as it's related to these workplace conflicts, right? Because part of this expertise that you bring, that is socialized into your department, into your unit, into your workplace, gives you some type of social capital. If you have good relationships, people recognize that you have good ideas, that you know this area. Let me go talk to Nikki because I know she's dealt with this before. And when I look at a definition of social capital, and I've been reading some stuff, if you don't know, all of you who are listening, that this issue is so challenging, this idea of conflict management, that there's a full journal. So there's an International Journal of Conflict Management. And so I'm reading some studies in there and talking about this relationship. And so that social capital, the sum of actual and potential resources embedded within and available through and derived from networks of relationships possessed by the individual or social unit. So your department can have some social capital. As an individual, you can have some social capital. And it comes from this competence, right? This doing well in the space and getting along with people. And so that should, at least in theory, give you some leverage in these spaces that there isn't much conflict because people recognize your intelligence, they recognize your competence, they recognize your value in the space. I don't know that we all experience that regularly or in the same way. I know there have been multiple times when I thought I had some social capital and they easily showed me not here.
Well, it's unfortunate, and we all know that, because that's what they hire you for. And then when you show up with it, that's the very thing that you are targeted for.
The
So
very thing, they weaponize it against you.
they do. It's a dual sword. Dr. Nikki.
Yes, I'm over here. Yep, that's exactly that is it, right? And let's have a conversation about the DEI space, right? And how that has now become an embedded structure that is sanctioned to limit your social capital to a certain group of people in a certain sort of way. So then if you want to move outside of that, it's like, no, stay in your little box, stay in your lane. You do the Black ERG thing, you do the DEI thing. We're gonna put you on this committee for the MLK event, but like it
Don't you love that? Don't you just love that? You're the perfect fit.
It's a day on, not a day off.
Exactly. And you know that your competence is so much broader than that. You know that your social network is so much broader than that. And this is the thing, like our ability to navigate biculturally really is an asset to us. And I think organizations underutilize that asset because they don't fully understand it.
Yeah. So I want to try something here, and and I'm sure you're gonna laugh, but it's really important. So I'm always looking into studies and looking at something recently, and this one gives me a list of. This comes from the Industrial and Labor Relations Review. Gives me a list of the common things people express are the conflicts they experience. So I'm gonna give you this list, and this is in rank order: employment conditions, supervisor and management decisions, personality conflicts, uncivil behavior, bullying and harassing, pay, and career advancement. So when I look at this stretch, these 7 things, and I understand why we need to distinguish each one and talk about how they are different and nuanced, but this all seems like it's one big thing to me. What is that?
I don't like it here, but I gotta
be. And the winner is.
Oh my goodness. But I am being flippant, but it really is true. Like when you are happy in a space, when you feel valued in a space, you show up. You're willing to do the things that, first of all, I don't know if y'all have had a conversation about this quiet quitting, but that is a whole phenomenon today.
Every
right?
week.
Every
week. It's quiet quitting,
yes,
it's quiet
indeed.
firing.
So, like,
and now it's quick quitting.
Oh yes. I'm gonna out myself. I quit my last job, which is why I work for myself. And I didn't feel no kind
I'm about
of way
to quit this show. Y'all acting out.
But seriously, like that's when you do the things. I personally hate the language of a be above and beyond. It's like, because we somehow have gotten to a place where we use above and beyond to actually be the benchmark for adequate. So I don't like that, but you're willing to sort of help out somebody or consult about something or take a little bit of extra time or maybe even do something outside of the norm for you every now and again, because you're like, I'm contributing to the greater good because I know such and such has my back, or that was I like being able to do this project with this person, etc. And so when you don't feel like that, everything becomes laborsome, right? And so your degrees of freedom, your degrees of tolerance for things that are annoying become very, very thin. And so now you can be more easily triggered.
I can't stand the way she say thank you. You heard how she say thank you? So let's sort of flip this now. So we've identified what are these issues and what are we dealing with. Let's kind of unpack what it means to get through it in a little more intentional way. I'd say there are some strategies, and we see all types of strategies. And I read a few things this week, and I thought, this doesn't make any sense. And so a few of them I sort of pulled off my list. But I found something interesting from earlier this month in Indeed, and it gives 9 key steps for resolving conflict at work. And some of these you've mentioned, Dr. Nikki, and some of it's come out in sort of our larger discussion, but I want us to unpack this a little bit more. So they list them as understanding the conflict, exploring alternatives, finding a neutral place to deal with it, communicate with both sides, note body language, identify a common goal, try a mediator, brainstorm solutions, and agree on a plan of action. Now that sounds smooth and very well packaged, but I feel like there's some things that are missing, particularly when it comes to us in the space. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it does sound smooth, right? And all of that works if both parties are coming to the conversation without implicit bias, without even a history, right? Because sometimes the conflict is not really about what's happening right now, but that time 2 years ago when blah blah blah, blah, right? Like
Wow.
people be holding on to grudges,
Holding on to it.
and keeping receipts, right? So yes, it makes perfect sense in an ideal world. And then the other thing that doesn't account for is like sometimes there are systems and practices in place in a work setting that can prolong that resolution of conflict, or sometimes even exacerbate the conflict when it doesn't need to be that way. But just straight up, also, like, we as Black professionals that work in predominantly white spaces, we know our innermost thoughts cannot be shared in the world of work. We can't keep our job. We can't talk about every microaggression that we experience. We can't name the systemic bias in the system all the time, because then we're that person. We're problematic, right? And so I think in that step-by-step guide, there's some other sub levels that folks of color have to engage in. And sometimes that looks like seeking out our sponsors, seeking out our advocates, our accomplices in the space to sort of help give us leverage. It's going to talk to other folks of color in another department or another space to see, how did you handle this? Did this ever happen before? Right? We have to do a lot more homework and a lot more behind the scenes things to resolve conflict.
And that's interesting, because I had a coworker I was talking with. This has been some months ago, and expressing concern about something that was happening in the workplace and in this meeting. And as we've discussed, right, so sort of holding his tongue about it, not wanting to say anything, but his senior colleague in the same meeting, who was a white male, interrupted the entire meeting to say, "I hate this. I hate what y'all talking about. Let's stop right now." So had no qualms about it and was okay and comfortable. So I own this space. I'll tell you what I think right now. I don't care what you're doing or who else is talking. And even if as a group they didn't feel was an appropriate way, he owned it as a white man in a white workforce in a white organization and said, but I can say what I want.
Yep. And that is true, right? Because the layers of identity for them are such that their personality, their personal experiences are way more salient than the identities of race, class, gender, etc. that they hold. So people are seeing their viewpoint with greater clarity, but when they're coming out of our mouths, they're looking at it through the lens of whatever expectation, stereotype, bias that they have. We haven't created enough movement around anti-racism in this country such that is the norm, right? That that my perspective is just my perspective because of my expertise, as we talked about a second ago. But I'm gonna always be seen as the angry Black woman if I'm angry, right? Like there's no other way around it. And in the world of work, sometimes you are legitimately angry, right? Like that's
Not
a
sometimes, a lot of
legitimate
times.
experience.
A
Yes.
lot of times at
Yes, a
work,
lot
you
of times.
legitimately
And nor
angry.
should we be afraid to show our emotions in the job, because there are those who do, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's okay. It's okay to be angry, and sometimes it's okay to be the angry Black woman, because then you're understood.
And what I love about that, Dr. Wendy, is sometimes when people are moved to tears because of their frustration and their anger, and from the outside, people see as, oh, this is someone who's emotional or is really downtrodden by this. But no, I think the tears are because if I don't cry, I'm gonna whoop somebody in here something bad. Right? These tears are protecting me. These are God's tears protecting
Right.
me from calling off and getting that shoe Dr. Nikki talked about and wearing you out.
I have been there. I have
Mm-hmm.
certainly been there.
I remember giving the advice to someone on the job who was moved to tears, and I said, don't even let them see that. Don't do that. Don't even let them see that. Go to the
It was in
bathroom.
my homegirl's office. It was
that was you. I did. Oh, okay.
Wait,
but
it was the angry tears and the quiet cussing, the like whisper.
Yes.
Never been say this to me. It was that.
Wait, so we got what is it? Quiet quitting and quiet cussing? All that's happening in the same place.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. Because if you talk the way you want to talk, everybody on the hallway will hear you with the door closed or not. So you got to get in there and get those teeth clenched and say what you're going to say.
And we have a good disclaimer here, because I know a lot of y'all are on Zoom meetings and team meetings. Please have your mute on if you quiet cussing, but it's not all the way quiet. I don't want no trouble.
When you see the red dot at the top, it lets you know it's recording.
All right, so here's the next thing. When I look at people who recommend strategies for getting out of these conflicts, in addition to that earlier list, I see some things for bosses, right? So if you are a boss and you're managing this, and you are one of the people who says, hey, I'm spending 40% of my time trying to get people to play nice in the sandbox at work, they're saying part of it on the boss's end is having a clear vision for where you're going so that people can work together on the same path, that you have to be consistent when dealing with staff. So if you are raising concerns about one person's actions that are similar to another's, you need to raise those concerns in both places. And we know that doesn't always happen with us. And that you can't show favoritism. And of course, we started out talking about communication. So what are we telling our bosses to help manage this? Because all the conflict isn't just coming from employees. There's a role that supervisors and managers and leaders play in this.
Well, leaders have different leadership styles. And oftentimes when it comes to training, which they say, oh, my people need to be trained. Oh, my people need to go there. Oh, you're here to do the assessment. Yes, my people, they need that.
Yeah.
And some of the leadership styles are the most dangerous. Those that are laissez-faire. Just gonna sit back, let things happen. I see it, but I'm gonna let you all work it out. That's dangerous. So there's some support that needs to take place with that type of a leader. And then we seem to think that because people aren't in a leadership position, that they know everything and that they're capable of handling everything, and they're not. And so the perception of the leader could be the misnomer. And that's when those who are the subordinates really need to step up and help that leader to become a better leader, because they could be the seed of the problem. Think about a leader who has a leadership style that cannot do anything unless it's just confusion going on at all times. And I've worked under that style of
I was going to
leadership.
say, I know you never worked at a place like that.
Woo!
It is
if
a
it isn't
tactic.
messy, yes, if it isn't messy, it's not happening here. We have to have some type of division going on at all times. There's some coaching, there's some support that needs to take place there as well. And so recognizing, doing this self-reflection is very important, and providing the tools for better
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The thing I was thinking about really is the inconsistency. That will get a leader into trouble more than anything else. You you can err on the side of rigidity by treating everybody the same. You can err on the side of laissez-faire by letting everybody do whatever they want to do. But when you start picking and choosing who gets what, that I find to be the most threatening
Yeah.
workplace. And
Yeah.
that builds
Ooh,
a
you
lot
mean
of
like having a
resentment.
pet? Like having a
Mm.
pet?
Uh-huh.
Mm.
You're that's just my go-to guy. We all know. We all know who the go-to guy is.
Mm.
And that, for me, that is about the leader being uncomfortable with discomfort, meaning
Absolutely.
they go to the people that help them feel comfortable and safe, the people that they can manage, and that don't give them any pushback. And then the people that need more direction or require more of them are the ones they don't want to engage really. And so I think that that's a huge misstep. And I really love what you were saying too, Dr. Wendy, about the ability to be fallible as a leader. Every semester when I would get in front of a new group of students, I would say, I'm an expert, but I don't have all the answers.
Come on
That's
now,
not what
talk
my
about it.
job is. My
Yeah.
job is to help you ask some really good questions, but I'm not
That's
going to
right.
know every minute thing. And then when I do mess up, to be accountable for that. And so that's the other thing that I think leaders do poorly, is when they mess up, or when they have ignored a conflict and now it has
Yes.
escalated, and now it's impacting the productivity of the entire team or the entire unit. You got to take responsibility for that. You got to own your part, and people are not excited to do that oftentimes.
That's
And
because
what?
it exposes a weakness, right? It
Yeah.
exposes a weakness.
Yeah. And then rather than deal with the issue, they'll try to get rid of the person, right? So rather than address what we've been seeing that's been brewing and stewing all the time, people have brought it to your attention, people express their concern about it, and you see it, you witness the interaction, whether in emails or in meetings. You say, oh, we'll just let that person go, or we'll push that person out, rather than take the leadership responsibility, the leadership stance that I've got to help people work through this. I love that.
That is what psychological safety is, right? That's exactly what that concept is about. Is there a sense of uh, safety in the work environment to admit mistake, to admit confusion, to admit that there's a skills gap, and that we can work to remediate that in the workplace, rather than it's a blaming and shaming thing. And I don't think, well, let me say this. I think psychological safety is a tenuous concept for Black and Brown folks, just generally speaking. Um, but I think we need to do more work around that. And then, in particular, we've mentioned the Zoom rooms a number of times today, but working remotely has been a game changer. Like, a lot of corporate
Yeah.
culture has
Yes, it
not,
has.
it's not
Yeah.
structured to even understand how that works, right? And so I think organizations need to be more critical and forward thinking about um, how do we transform this workspace and our understanding about what work is and about what inclusion is from a remote space. And it's just like we pretending like we're doing the exact same thing, except you in your living room. No, it's different. It's very, very
So
different.
very different. So very different. And I'm glad you brought that up, because even with clients I've been working with a couple of organizations right now, and listening to them talk about the challenges they're having in the team, and we're recognizing that it's stemming from working remotely, that the types of uh, symmetry and the cohesiveness they used to have stemmed from being able to see each other regularly and just stop by someone's desk and ask a question. But now everything is relegated to, I got to wait for you to respond to the email or wait for the Zoom call. And they don't have that same natural connectedness that they felt when they were in the office all the time.
Honest to goodness. And the whole email is overrated. That is some people, they ask the question, what's your favorite way to be, to use to communicate?
I got that question today.
Oh my goodness. It's ridiculous. And some people never want to talk to you, but I don't want 100 emails to go back and forth with one-liners. Just pick up the phone.
Not only that, Dr. Wendy, I haven't met an email yet that doesn't escalate conflict. Have you ever seen an email that de-escalates?
Oh no, because I'm always reading email like, what did she just say? I know she didn't write that.
With 12 people, 14 people, CC,
right?
You're like, okay,
oh my
okay.
That
you just created a conflict,
right?
I was being nice. Let me get Dr. Nikki's shoe.
Exactly.
All right. So I think when we think about this broadly in our conversation today about when they go low, how do we respond and how do we deal with these conflicts? We've identified a whole bunch of things that are causes of it and symptoms of it and outcomes of it. But I think when we break it down to what does this mean for employees, there's some things we've said you need to work on. Self-analysis. What are you willing to compromise? What are you willing to change as you negotiate the space with the people where the conflict seems to lie? And I love Dr. Nikki's idea of what Nana said, never argue with a fool. We want to make sure that you don't seem to be the person that is out of whack as well. Exactly. So make sure you maintain your composure and do it, right?
Identify that
plaque. Identify the observable, objective facts. So let's take as much of your personal out of it and put in what's the real issue here. How do we get to that? What is it about you, Dr. Wendy? You said this, that's raising this level of angst in the space. Are you making some mistakes in how you're communicating with people or dealing with people that's causing some of this? Recognize your own value and how your values align with the organization. If you're not getting experience that speaks to that, that might be part of the reason why you got these lists of things that you don't like that's creating all the conflicts. Leverage your colleagues, leverage your mentors and your sponsors to help you navigate difficulty and understand how you might you can see a different vantage point from what's happening. And it is okay to show emotions, do the ugly cry and quiet cuss in somebody else's office, but it's okay to show emotion when there's conflict. For supervisors and managers, we said challenge people in ways that translate to professional growth rather than tear them down. Keep conversations going so that we can get to the root of what's happening, but know when to stop. Train people on how to recognize conflict. So you probably have to create some type of group or team protocol for it and recognize that we act differently when we do that. Know that even when you have these package steps that you might pull up on the internet or that were handed off to you by HR, that those don't always account for everything you're dealing with in your particular organization, your particular situation. Recognize that expression of concern does not mean the person is problematic. It is just an expression of concern. Be okay with not knowing everything. Dr. Nikki said, you can be the expert, doesn't mean you know all the answers. Recognize your own deficiencies and be consistent. At the organizational level, we're saying, find out what people are coming to work with that creates this nonsense. There are some things in the environment. There might be some things just in the ecosystem of the type of work that you do that keep people on edge. I love this notion of the catch-22 racism. Recognize that you may be excluding people because of how you expect them to respond and then how you isolate them when they don't respond in the way you think they should. Get more education on microaggressions. Understand the role of social networks and social capital and how to help people navigate those to deflate conflict. Provide a coach for staff and for leaders. Also, this is a big one, right? Recognize that your organizational culture may be the cause of the conflict. And it is okay to recognize there's a skills gap in your organization and figure out how to solve it. So we take all that into consideration, right? At the employee level, supervisor level, organizational level. So here's the question. And we always ask this at the end of the show. So what's the black tax here? if you do not take any recommendations that we give out tonight, what does that mean? What's the price you pay for not listening? Dr. Nikki.
First of all, that was a masterclass in summarization.
Awesome.
You gave it all the points, and you categorized them by domains. I am hats off to you, sir.
Hey.
I wish I could track
Yes.
well.
Yes.
But it's so I love ending here because as I was listening to you, if anybody listens to the break room, what I'm about to say, is completely on brand. What I was listening to, the thing that kept coming up was, and also no, don't let nobody just try you just because.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, you are a human being worthy of dignity and respect, and in all of that we're talking about, even in your accountability, even in your self-awareness, that does not mean you have to compromise your integrity, right? That does not mean you have to sink in on yourself. What it does require is for you to think differently about how you navigate these experiences. But don't do anything in the world of work that you can't lay your head down and sleep good about at the end of the day. And I think what happens, the black tax that I see sometimes, is racial stress that has turned into racial trauma because people have tried to fit themselves in a box. They have silenced themselves. They haven't shown up as their full selves. They haven't sort of stood in their expertise and worth. They have just sort of swallowed the microaggressions or said, well, when I get the promotion, then, or if I talk to this person, then. And that takes its toll on the body and on the psyche. And we don't want your ability to have a full career and to be a professional and to develop and grow and just make your livelihood to come at a cost to your mental health. There is no job on planet Earth that is worth that.
Ooh. In line with what Dr. Nikki says, I would say the same thing. Don't compromise just being me. It's all about being healthy, physically, mentally. It is all about being just me. So don't tie your identity to your job. And I think India Ari put it best when she said, I am not my hair. I am not my skin. I am the soul that lives within.
You better say that, Dr. Wendy.
Yes.
So you're gonna leave me to go after India Ari? What is that?
Yes.
I think y'all ganging up on me. Well, I'll say this. I think there are so many gems in what you dropped, Dr. Nikki, so many gems in what you dropped, Dr. Wendy, and you can't go wrong with India Ari. I think the other thing is, and we talked about this, I laughed with this with our producer earlier today, don't let them people get on your nerves, right? Stay true to you. If you don't listen to these things, you might be on the outs. These are the types of things that people take advantage of and manipulate and weaponize against you, and you could be without a job. Might be the job that you hate, that you really need to leave. Think about what that looks like on the way out and how to bounce back from that and how to leverage the transition. But these are things you gotta be careful because we are targeted for conflict in organizations. And all the things we talk about today are to help you figure out how to navigate that safely, at least in a personal safe space, even if the organization isn't safe for you. I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We love these conversations on Thursdays. And I'm so happy that you got a chance to join us, Dr. Nikki. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. This was a good way for me to put a cap on my day this evening. I appreciate the invitation, and we have to figure out how to have y'all on the break room. So the cross collab has to go the other way around. So be on the lookout for that.
We will definitely do that, Dr. Wendy. It is always a pleasure to be beside you in these evenings. For the rest of you, if you want to connect with Living Corporate, you can follow us on all of our social media channels. That's on the web. We are livingcorporate.tv. Twitter, we are at Living Corporate. LinkedIn, we are Living-Corporate. Instagram, Living Corporate. And you can get the Access Point, on anywhere where you get your podcast. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.
This episode of Living Corporate is brought to you by Blind. Blind is a safe, trusted community of more than 5 million verified professionals. Head over to teamblind.com to get the latest insights into salaries, company reviews, and interview experiences at thousands of companies worldwide.